show what I think is a somewhat disturbing trend. Although there is some growth in the patent filings by resident applicants compared to non-residents, you see that the non-residents filings swamp those of the resident filings. And the number of applications filed abroad by companies or individuals of Indian origin is less than 10,000, which I think is a pretty small number given the size of the Indian economy. Now here is what I think is really a troubling figure, and that is the graph that shows a decline, a very sharp decline in the past 3 or 4 years in the number of patents that are actually granted to individuals or companies where the inventors are of Indian origin. And I think for last year, I just looked at the WPO statistics last night, there was less than 600 patents granted to Indian nationals. I think that is a very troubling fact. The number of patents granted to foreign applicants is likewise declining, and it's surprising. It could be that the Indian Patent Office is getting tougher on obviousness. And if that's the case, you won't hear any complaints from me, but nevertheless, I still think that those numbers are pretty low. It kind of reminds me of a judge we used to have in Canada in the trial division of what is now the federal court. He was the judge who decided most of the patent cases in Canada, and he was very tough on patents. And he was a non-technical person. My feeling was that the way he approached a patent in deciding whether it's valid or not was this way, that if the invention was something that he could understand, then by definition it was obvious. So not many patents passed that test. Now, Korea is a real success story. Their GDP is not yet to the level of India or China or other countries, but that's at $1.3 trillion, which is not insignificant. But take a look at their patent application filings, and the gray bars show that the Republic of Korea inventors were responsible for almost 150,000 filings in 2012, a huge number. And look at also that in relation to foreign filings, they filed more than 50,000 applications that year abroad. Very impressive figures, and compare that with what we saw for India and China. And the grants likewise are very substantial. The US GDP is standing close to $17 trillion, and the economy seems to be continuing to grow. Right now, the US economy is about 27% of the worldwide GDP. And so it's reasonable to conclude that the United States has a very strong vested interest in trying to ensure that IP rights are protected outside of the United States, because their continued growth depends on protection of their homegrown IP. And the IP filing statistics are also very impressive. Notice that foreigners file slightly more applications a year in the United States than do US inventors. But the number of filings abroad is huge, about 200,000 in 2012. The grants were also very substantial. Oops, thank you. And I turn now to Canada. We have a pretty impressive GDP at $1.8 trillion for a country of just 35 million people or so. But look at the patent applications. Canadian inventors are responsible for only about 4,000 patent applications a year, despite that very impressive GDP. They file lots of patent applications abroad, but in many cases, these are probably by Canadian subsidiaries of US or other foreign companies. So again, you have to take these figures with a bit of a grain of salt. The patent grants in Canada basically track pretty well the filing statistics. I turn lastly to the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is a small country geographically, but it's a big country IP-wise. Their GDP last year was about 800 billion US dollars, but take a look at their filings. A huge number of filings for a relatively small population, and a huge number of filings abroad as well. I have a feeling that my friend Mr. Hinman had something to do with that. The grants are also very impressive in the Netherlands. And so for the last two slides that I've put together, what I've done is to make graphs that show the relationship between the number of patent applications filed by residents per $1 trillion GDP. And if you see that South Korea is way ahead of the pack, followed by China, but I discussed what I think the Chinese data mean. And unfortunately for me, being a Canadian, the Canadian line is at the very bottom, even below India. And that is an indication to me that Canadian government policy is not really working very well for encouraging innovative activity in Canada. And in terms of foreign applications filed by domestic applicants, you see that South Korea is way ahead of everybody, but take a look at the Netherlands. The Netherlands is second on the list, ahead of the United States, ahead of China, and ahead of Canada. So in closing, I would just like to share briefly with you a conversation I had with Mr. Hinman's predecessor at Philips, Mr. Ruud Peters. This was at dinner in Amsterdam last June, and I said to him, Mr. Peters, why is it that a country like the Netherlands, as small as it is in geographic size, with its main natural resource being its people, why is it that it's able to compete so effectively with global giants in the IP field? And his answer was, we Dutch people are stubborn. I think we have a lot to learn from the Netherlands. Thank you very much.